UPSC has focused upon government schemes, policies, initiatives, and banking and finance. These are the two most dominant themes. So as the government borrows more amount of money, the supply of the government security is going to increase. As the supply of the government security increases, the demand for the government security will reduce. The bond prices will reduce and the yield rates on the government securities would increase. As I said at the start of my discussion, three things are important. One, conceptual understanding. Two, knowing the current affairs. Three, interlinking the current affairs to the core concepts. If you're able to do that, you would have got the right answers to most of the questions. Yes, good evening, everyone. Am I audible? Are you able to view the screen? Okay. Okay, Mangal sir has already carried out a detailed analysis of all of the subjects. I will be doing the same with the Indian economy. See, as far as Indian economy's weightage is concerned in the UPSC prelims, as you can see on a consistent basis, 25 to 30 questions are asked from the Indian economy in the prelims examination. And out of these 25 to 30 questions, majorly UPSC has focused upon government schemes, policies, initiatives, and banking and finance. These are the two most dominant themes. So when we prepared the test paper for the pre-prediction, we have kept this particular pattern of the UPSC in mind. That is why you would find approximately around 25 to 30 questions from the Indian economy in the pre-prediction test. And we have also kept the weightage in this weightage in mind while making the test paper. Okay. So with respect to the overall difficulty level of the questions, as I said, we had asked 25 to 30 questions from the Indian economy. And what I found surprising was out of those 25 questions, almost like 15 to 16 questions were very difficult for the students. When we went through the analysis, we found that the students had found at least like 15 to 16 questions very, very difficult. So what I want to say here is, there are three things which are needed in order to get the right answers to the questions in the pre-prediction test. One, conceptual clarity of the economic topics. Two, keeping yourself updated with what is happening in the Indian economy. Three, interlinking the core concepts to the current affairs. If you're able to do these three things, then most of the questions which you found to be on the tougher side, those would have become quite easier for you. So keeping that in mind, let me start the discussion of the first question. The first question is with respect to which among the following are likely to lead to increase in the yield rates on the government securities in India. And the second one is with respect to the government's securities acquisition program. I have picked up these two questions to start off with because of the lower accuracy rate among the students. As you can see, only 30% of the students who had attempted the test could get the right answer to these two questions. So before discussing the answer to these two questions, let me first highlight as to why we have asked these two questions in our pre-prediction test. See, in the recent union budget, the finance minister announced that the government would be borrowing approximately around rupees 12 lakh crores in this financial year. And this money would be borrowed through the issuance of the government securities. As soon as this announcement was made by the finance minister, the yield rates on the government securities started increasing. It crossed a benchmark of 6%. Now, typically, when India is facing the recession, and if the yield rates keep on increasing, the borrowing cost of the government would increase. See, if you have to come out of the recession, government needs to borrow more amount of money. More importantly, the government must borrow money at a lower rate of interest. But if the yield rates increase, the government would be forced to borrow money at a higher rate of interest. So, in order to bring down these yield rates, the RBI has adopted both conventional as well as unconventional approaches. For example, you must have heard about open market operation, right? This is a conventional approach. But apart from this conventional approach, RBI has adopted unconventional approaches. One being the operation twist and the other one being the government securities acquisition program. In particular, these two things are extremely important for your upcoming prelims examination. Why? See, when you read the standard economy related textbooks, right, we keep on reading that the main mandate of the RBI is to influence the interest rates in the economy to pump in money or to suck out the excess money. So RBI will lower the interest rates to pump in money, and RBI would increase the interest rates to suck out the excess liquidity. That's what we have studied in the normal textbooks. But in this particular case, RBI is neither interested in influencing the interest rates, nor is it interested in influencing the liquidity conditions. RBI is more concerned about bringing down the yield rates on the government securities. So this is a kind of out of textbook approach which has been adopted by the RBI. This is an innovative approach which has been used by the RBI. That is why this topic becomes important for your prelims examination. Now, with respect to this topic, what all things should you know? One, what are the factors which influences the yield rates on the government securities? What factors could lead to increase or decrease in the yield rates on the government securities? This is one thing. Second, if the yield rates on the government securities increases, how is it going to impact the Indian economy? What adverse impact it would have? Third, how do the Operation Twist and GSAP basically work? So three things are important. One, factors affecting the yield rates on the government securities. What will happen if the yield rates on the government security increases? And third, how do Operation Twist and GSAP work? That is why we had asked these two questions in our pre-pariksha test. So most of the students had a difficulty in understanding this. So let me discuss the answer to this particular question. Before that, see, we all know that the yield rates on the government securities, it is inversely proportional to the bond prices. Inversely proportional. You know this already. If the bond prices increases, the yield rates on the government security would reduce. If the bond price reduces, the yield rates on the government security would increase. That is what you already know. But the question is, on what factors do the yield rates on the government security increase or decrease? Now, there are basically three important aspects. Three important factors. One, the overall borrowings of the government. Two, rate of interest in the Indian economy. Three, rate of interest in the US economy. Let's say the advanced economies. So here the yield rates in the government security basically depend upon three important aspects. The overall borrowings of the government, rate of interest in the Indian economy, and the rate of interest in the US economy. So let's understand as to how the yield rates changes because of these three things. Starting with the borrowings. Now let's say the government is going to borrow more amount of money. So as the government borrows more amount of money, the supply of the government security is going to increase. As the supply of the government security increases, the demand for the government security will reduce. The bond prices will reduce and the yield rates on the government securities would increase. On the other hand, if the government's borrowings reduce, the supply of the government security will reduce, demand will increase, bond prices will increase, and bond yields will reduce. So the bond yields, it is directly proportional to the borrowings. Higher borrowings leads to higher yield rates. Lower borrowings lead to lower yield rates. Now, can you understand as to why the yield rates in the government securities is increasing? Because the government is going to borrow more amount of money in this particular financial year. As I said, the government is going to borrow almost around 12 lakh crores in the market. And this will be borrowed through the government securities. So as the supply of the government securities is going to increase, the yield rates on the government securities is increasing. This is one way. Second, how rate of interest in the Indian economy influences the yield rates. Now let's say I'm talking about decrease in the rate of interest on the loans. As the rate of interest on loans reduces, can I say that the loans would be made available to people at a cheaper rates? So as the loans become cheaper, the demand for the G-Secs would increase. As the demand increases, the bond prices would increase and hence the bond yields would reduce. Same here, when the rate of interest in the economy increases, the bond yields will increase. So can I make a conclusion here? Conclusion is rate of interest in India and the yield rates they are directly proportional. As the rate of interest reduces, the yield rates will reduce. As the rate of interest increases, the yield rates will increase. Rate of interest in US economy. Now, the US Fed Bank can basically adopt two types of monetary policies, which you know of. One is quantitative easing and the other one is Fed tapering. As part of quantitative easing, the rates of interest on loans in US that will reduce. So there will be excess amount of dollar supply. Excess dollar supply would find its way into India, because of which foreign inflows will increase. These foreign investors, they would be interested to buy the government securities. So demand for the G-Secs would increase. Bond prices will increase, and hence the yield rates will come down. Similarly, when the US Fed Bank is adopting the Fed tapering, that time the yield rates on the government securities will increase. So once again, a conclusion which we can make here is the yield rates on the government securities in India and the rate of interest in the US economy, they are directly proportional. Once again. So here, each of these three things, borrowings, rate of interest in India, and the rate of interest in US, all of these three factors affect the yield rates. More importantly, all of these three factors are directly proportional to the yield rates. As these three things reduce, the yield rates will also reduce. I hope it is clear now, all of you. Okay. Now, as I said, the yield of the government securities has started increasing because of the higher borrowings. If the bond yield starts increasing, it means that the government would be forced to borrow money at a higher cost. Borrowing costs of the government would keep on increasing. So to support the borrowing program of the government and to enable the government to borrow money at a lower rate of interest, what RBI has adopted is, RBI has adopted the Government Securities Acquisition Program, GSAP. So with respect to GSAP, as to how it is going to work, I'm sure you must be knowing about the open market operations, right? OMOs, open market operations. Under OMOs, there are basically two things which can take place. One, RBI will purchase the government securities from the banks and it will inject money, or RBI will sell the government securities and suck out the money. The first one here, purchasing the government securities, it is done when the economy is facing recession. RBI sells the government securities to suck out money, it is done during inflation. You know this thing, right? Now with respect to GSAP, GSAP is this part, wherein RBI is purchasing the government securities from the banks and injecting the money. So how it is going to affect the yield rates? See, when the RBI purchases the government securities, especially the long-term government securities, supply of the long-term government securities will reduce, the prices of the bonds will increase, and hence RBI would be able to bring down the yield rates on these government securities. That is a GSAP. How is it different from open market operation? First difference, as I said, open market operation will involve both purchase and sale, either this or that. But GSAP will include only the purchase of the government securities. That is the first one. Second one here, see, when the RBI carries out the open market operations are carried out at the discretion of the RBI. As and when RBI wants to carry out the open market operation, RBI will come out with a notification, which means that the banks, financial institutions have absolutely no idea as to how much money the RBI is going to pump in, how much government securities the RBI is going to purchase. So banks have absolutely no idea because it is carried out at the discretion of the RBI. But under GSAP, RBI gives an upfront commitment. So RBI gives a commitment that it will purchase certain amount of government securities within a particular time frame. For example, now RBI has said that in the first quarter of this financial year, RBI would purchase government securities worth 1 lakh crores. So this is a kind of commitment, an upfront commitment which the RBI has given. Question is why? Now, when such a kind of commitment is given by the RBI, can I say that here the banks are incentivized or influenced or nudged to purchase the government securities, right? Because they know that RBI is going to purchase from them. So automatically the demand for the government securities is going to increase. As the demand increases, the prices would increase, and as the prices increase, the yield rates on the government securities will come down. So one of the primary difference between the open market operation and the GSAP here is GSAP, we have an upfront commitment given by the RBI. I hope we are clear with this, all of you. Yes? Okay. Let's go back to the question. Which among the following are likely to lead to increase in the yield rates on the government securities? I have very clearly said that the yield rates in the government securities in India is directly proportional to borrowings, rate of interest in the Indian economy, and the rate of interest in the US economy. So here, the first one, increase in government borrowings, yes. Increase in rate of interest in India, yes. Low interest rates in advanced economies, no. Low interest rates in advanced economies will lead to decrease in the yield rates. So the right answer would be 1 and 2 only. With respect to question number 2, which among the following statements is incorrect with respect to the government's RBI's GSAP program? The incorrect statement is this. Because as is discussed under GSAP, the RBI only purchases the government securities. There's no concept of selling of government securities. So if you have understood this particular aspect as to how the yield rates in the government securities are basically increasing or decreasing, how the GSAP program of the RBI basically works, you would have easily got the right answer to this particular question. So this question was not per se very difficult, but you just have to understand as to how demand and supply of the government securities affect the yield rates on government securities. If you had applied that particular logic, you would have got the right answer to this question. Next question. In which among the following ways does the rate hike by the US Fed Bank impact the Indian economy? I have already discussed the answer to this particular question in my discussion. How increase in the interest rates by US Fed Bank impact the Indian economy? As you can see here, US Fed Bank can basically adopt two types of policies, quantitative easing and Fed tapering. So question here is, what would happen when the US Fed Bank adopts the Fed tapering policy? So when the US Fed Bank starts increasing the rate of interest, there would be shortage of dollars in US, which means the amount of dollar inflows into India would reduce. And as the dollar inflows reduces, the rupee value would depreciate. Apart from that, as the inflows reduces, the demand for the government securities will reduce, bond prices would reduce, and the yield rates would increase. Once again, the same logic there. Okay. So go back to this question. It says, how does the rate hike by the US Fed Bank impact the economy? 1, it will lead to decrease in FPI inflows. 2, it will lead to rupee depreciation. Decrease in bond yields? No, it will lead to increase in the bond yields. So right answer is B, 1 and 2 only. So once again here, why we have asked this particular question? Because you must have been reading newspapers. Whenever the US Fed Bank changes the policy rates, whether it increases or decreases the policy rates, it has an impact on the economy. That is why we had asked this particular question. Okay, coming to next one. Consider the following statements about the non-banking financial company microfinance institution in India. I found this particular question to be on the easier side, but still the accuracy rate among the students was on the lower side. As you can see, only 41% of the students could get the right answer to this question. Now, this question was asked in the pre-prediction test because the Reserve Bank of India has recently come out with a consultative document. In this consultative document, it has identified various challenges in the microfinance sector, and accordingly, it has delineated as what strategies can be adopted for the microfinance sector. That is why we have asked this particular question. So with respect to the microfinance sector, see, basically when we say microfinance loans, the microfinance loans can be given by the scheduled commercial banks, regional rural banks, cooperative banks, small finance banks, and a specific category of NBFCs known as NBFC microfinance institutions. Right now, RBI has come up with the detailed guidelines with respect to the microfinance sector. And these detailed guidelines are applicable to the NBFC MFIs. As to what are the microfinance loans? Microfinance loans are those loans that are given to low income households, loans which are of small value, loans which are given without any kind of collateral. They are of short duration. And more importantly, here, as far as the rate of interest on these loans is concerned, the RBI has fixed a ceiling rate. That means maximum rate of interest at which the NBFCs can give loans. Below that particular ceiling rate, they cannot give loans. So the NBFCs have not been given the freedom to give loans at whatever rate of interest they would want to. They would have to give the loans at a rate below the rate at which the RBI has fixed the ceiling. So if you would have known these three things from the perspective of the prelims examination, you would have easily attempted the answer to this particular question. Look at the first statement. It says, currently only NBFC MFI can give out the microfinance loans. The statement here is incorrect. Second one, NBFC MFI microfinance loans are not backed by collateral. Yes. NBFC MFIs are free to charge the interest rate. No. RBI fixes the ceiling rate. So this statement here is wrong. Apart from that, I also felt that some students might have read about the microfinance sector. In spite of that, they might have committed silly mistakes because they might have not read the question properly. Here, the demand of the question is to find out the incorrect statement, not the correct statement. So the right answer here would be 1 and 3 only. Okay, next one. In a particular economy, the nominal GDP is higher than the potential GDP. What does it denote? Overall, most of the students have found this particular question to be of average difficulty because, as you can see, the accuracy rate is 53%. So almost half of the students were able to get the right answer to this particular question. So let me discuss this concept of nominal GDP and the potential GDP, and then we'll solve the question. I hope all of you know the concept of the nominal GDP, right? Nominal GDP is referred to as the current market value of all goods and services that we produce in an economy. And how do we measure the nominal GDP? If you want to measure the nominal GDP, you can adopt the expenditure method for the GDP calculation. This is calculated as the consumption expenditure plus the investment expenditure plus the government expenditure plus the net value of exports, that is imports minus exports. This is simply the formula for the GDP calculation by the expenditure method. Now this value, I hope you must have studied that in the textbooks, NCERT textbooks, we refer to this as aggregate demand in an economy. Aggregate demand, right? As far as potential GDP is concerned, potential GDP is the maximum value of goods and services that can be produced in an economy. What is the maximum value? So when we say nominal GDP, it is a current market value. But when we say potential GDP, it's a maximum value of goods and services. Which means here, if the economy is working at full potential, if you are working at full potential, what is the maximum value of goods and services that we can produce? Now, this full potential would mean that we are able to provide full employment to all the people in the country. We have provided them with the necessary skill set. We have been able to provide them with the necessary employment. We have been able to optimally harness the raw materials. We are using advanced technology. The capital utilization efficiency is higher. So all of these factors basically determine as to what is my potential GDP. As to how this GDP is calculated, you don't have to get into that part. Now, this potential GDP, I can also call this as aggregate supply. AS, aggregate supply. Now, you must have studied in the NCERT textbooks that a economy is in equilibrium condition as long as the aggregate demand is equal to the aggregate supply. As long as aggregate demand is equal to aggregate supply, a country will be in equilibrium condition. But whenever there are mismatches between aggregate demand and aggregate supply, what will it lead to? It will lead to two kind of business cycles. One, inflation. Two, deflation. For example, let's say the aggregate demand is more than the aggregate supply. Let's say my aggregate demand here is 150 rupees and aggregate supply is 100 rupees. My aggregate demand is more than the aggregate supply, which means my current market value is more than the maximum value of goods and services. What does this mean? This means that the economy is facing a high rate of inflation. Question is why? Why are we facing high rate of inflation? This could be because of two reasons. One, the government may have adopted the fiscal stimulus policy, or the RBI may have adopted the expansionary monetary policy. Now, question is, how would you reduce this inflation? How would you reduce this inflation? So there are two ways of doing it. One, I can increase my aggregate supply to match up to the demand, right? I can reduce the gap. But once again, is it possible for me to increase aggregate supply? It's not possible, because what does the aggregate supply mean? Aggregate supply means what is the maximum value of goods and services which I can manufacture when an economy is working at full potential. So already economy is working, if it works at full potential, the maximum value of goods and services which we can manufacture is 100. So I cannot increase the aggregate supply. What's the other way? I have to reduce the aggregate demand. So we need to reduce the aggregate demand, for which we have to reduce the rate of inflation. Now this gap, right? This gap between aggregate demand and aggregate supply, 150 minus 100, I would call this as the inflationary gap in the economy. Nothing else. Inflationary gap. Let's consider another scenario wherein the aggregate demand is lower than the aggregate supply. Let's say in this case, aggregate demand is 100, aggregate supply is 150. What does this mean? This means that I'm not able to work at a full potential, which means here the economy is facing deflation. So this gap between aggregate demand and aggregate supply, which is 50, I would call this as deflationary gap. Deflationary gap. Now question is, how will I reduce the deflationary gap? To reduce the deflationary gap, I would have to increase the aggregate demand. So whatever I've discussed so far, it is there right in front of your screen. I've just tabulated it here. As you can see, inflationary gap would mean aggregate demand is more than the aggregate supply. Deflationary gap means aggregate demand is lower than the aggregate supply. So in case of inflationary gap, we need to reduce the demand in the economy. In case of deflationary gap, I need to increase the demand in the economy. So if you have understood this thing, you would have easily answered this particular question. In a particular economy, the nominal GDP is higher than the potential GDP. So which means that there is an inflationary gap in an economy. What does it denote? One, economy is operating at full employment potential? No. Adoption of fiscal stimulus policy? Yes. Higher rate of inflation? Yes. So answer would be 2 and 3 only. Okay. Okay. Coming to next question. Which among the following factors can possibly lead to increase in the rate of inflation in the long run? In the long run, what can lead to increase in the rate of inflation? I think the first one is very obvious. Expansionary monetary policy. If RBI adopts the expansionary monetary policy for a long period of time, the money supply in the economy would increase, and this will contribute to higher rate of inflation. If you look at the second one, rupee devaluation. See, with respect to rupee devaluation, we do know that whenever there is surplus amount of dollar inflows into India, what will happen to value of rupee? The value of rupee would appreciate, right? and if the value of rupee appreciates, my imports will become cheaper, exports will become uncompetitive, which means this would have an adverse impact on the domestic manufacturing. So to check large scale volatility or increase in the value of Indian currency, RBI will carry out a rupee devaluation. Now what will happen in rupee devaluation? RBI will suck out the excess dollars and pump in equivalent amount of Indian rupees. So just imagine if RBI keeps on doing this rupee devaluation, if RBI keeps on sucking out excess dollars and keeps on injecting rupees, obviously in the long run, this is going to lead to increase in the rate of inflation. So here we had basically tested two important aspects. One was the concept of rupee devaluation and the other one was the concept of inflation. So these two topics were interlinked to each other. And that is how this question was asked. As far as the third option is concerned, inadequate forex reserves. Now, if you look at some of the poor countries, some poor countries may not have adequate amount of forex reserves to pay for their basic imports. And if they are not able to import their basic goods, basic services, automatically the supply of basic goods and services would reduce, demand would increase, and this will lead to a high rate of inflation. So the right answer is 1, 2, and 3. Okay. This was a very interesting question. Assuming fiscal deficit remains constant, a consistent increase in primary deficit would denote which among the following? Now, I have felt that this question was relatively easy. If you had applied a basic knowledge, basic concepts which you have already learned, along with little bit of CSAT knowledge, you would have easily got the right answer to this question. But once again, the accuracy rate was very low, 30%. So if you have to answer this question, three important concepts are needed. One, the concept of public debt. Two, the concept of fiscal deficit. Three, the concept of primary deficit. If you are able to link these three concepts, you would have got the right answer to this question. Let's understand how. Now we all know about the public debt. Public debt means the total accumulated borrowings of the government. How much money it has borrowed in total. What is its total outstanding liabilities? That is the public debt. When it comes to fiscal deficit tells us the annual borrowings of the government. How much money the government has borrowed in a single year, right? Now this money which the government borrows, this money, it can use it for basically two purposes. One, it can use it for revenue expenditure. Two, it can use it for the capital expenditure. With respect to revenue expenditure, it can use it for the payment of interest. It can use it for the payment of subsidies. It can use it for defense. It can use it for public administration and so on. Capital expenditure, it can use it for creation of capital assets. It can use it to give loans to various states and union territories and so on. Now, let's say we have borrowed 100 rupees in a single year. Now, where is this 100 rupees be spent? This 100 rupees is spent for both revenue expenditure as well as capital expenditure. This 100 rupees is spent for interest payment, subsidies, defense, public administration, asset creation, and loans. But as you know, out of this 100 rupees, we are also using it to pay our interest, right? Let's say in this case, I'm paying an interest of rupees 10, which means how much money is the government left with to be spent in the economy? How much it is left? It is 100 minus 10, that is 90 rupees that is left with to undertake expenses for these things, except the interest payment. To do that, what we have is a concept of primary deficit. A primary deficit, it is calculated as the fiscal deficit minus the interest payments. You already know these things, right? You already studied all of these deficits. What is fiscal deficit, public debt, primary deficit? Now let's apply the logic and try to find out the answer to this question. Go back to the question. What does it say? It says that the fiscal deficit remains constant. Okay, let's see this with respect to fiscal deficit. Let's say 2016, 17, 2017, 18, 2019, 20. The fiscal deficit is rupees 100. I'm borrowing only rupees 100. So my fiscal deficit has remained constant. And what does it say here? My primary deficit is consistently increasing. The primary deficit is consistently increasing. Now apply simple maths, simple CSAT. Now, if primary deficit is increasing and my fiscal deficit has remained constant, can I say that my interest payments is reducing? Very simple, right? For example, let's say in the year 2016-17, I'm paying rupees 10 in the form of interest payment. Next year, I'm paying rupees 9 in the form of interest payment. Next year, I'm paying rupees 8 in the form of interest payments. Now, if you calculate the primary deficit, 100 minus 10, 90. 100 minus 9, 91. 100 minus 8, 92. So my primary deficit is consistently increasing. Now go back. It says a consistent increase in primary deficit would denote which among the following? One, decrease in the interest payments. Yes, my interest payments are reducing. Question is, why is my interest payment reducing? My interest payment is reducing because I have low level of public debt. My public debt is lower. That is why I'm paying less amount of interest. If my public debt was higher, I would have paid more amount of interest. So if you look at the second option, it says higher outstanding public debt. No. So the right answer is A, one only. So very simple. If you had applied your concepts of what are the different types of deficit, what is the concept of public debt, you would have easily got the right answer. Okay, coming to next one. The central excise duty on petrol and diesel is a specific tax. Which among the following statements best describes such a regime on the petroleum products? Once again, accuracy rate is very low. Only 25% of the students were able to get the right answer. If you have to get the right answer to this question, you should be aware about two ways in which the indirect taxes can be imposed. One is ad valorem taxes and the other one is the specific tax. If you would have known that particular concept, you would have got the right answer to this question. So let's understand this part. Now, when we say indirect taxes can be imposed in two ways. One is ad valorem taxes and second one is the specific tax. These are the two ways in which indirect taxes can be imposed. When we say ad valorem taxes, these are imposed on the price of a product. The tax rate here is denoted in terms of percentage of the price of the product. The best example here happens to be GST. So you know under GST you have different rates such as 3%, 5%, 12%, 18%. So here you are paying this as a percentage of the price of a product. For example, on gold, you have 3% GST. What this means is if you buy gold worth rupees 100, you would be paying rupees 3 in the form of GST. So the tax here, the tax is not dependent upon the volume of the commodity. It is dependent upon the price of the commodity. So higher prices would mean higher tax collection. But when it comes to specific tax here, specific tax is imposed on per unit of product. Here, for example, petrol. Now, when you are paying the tax on petrol, you are paying the tax not in terms of the price of the petrol. You are paying the tax in terms of per liter of petrol. For example, in case of India right now, the tax which you are paying is rupees 32.9 per unit of per 1 liter of petrol. So here the tax as such, it is dependent upon the quantity. It is not dependent upon the price. So can I say here with respect to specific tax, as the quantity bought by the people increases, as people buy more of petrol and diesel, automatically the tax collection of the government would increase? Yes. But in the case of ad valorem, as the prices of the commodities increases, the government would get higher taxes. But in case of specific tax, as a quantity of commodity increases bought by the people, the tax collection would increase. So if you had known this important difference between ad valorem taxes and specific taxes, you would have got the right answer to this question. So look at this question. The central excise duty on petrol and diesel is specific tax. Which among the following statement best describes such a regime on petroleum products? The answer is C. The excise duty collections of the government depend upon the volume of sale of petrol and diesel, not on the prices. Okay. Now one would argue that if prices increases, demand would reduce, and as the demand reduces, that tax collections of the government would reduce. But here, that is why specifically we had asked in the statement itself that when we say specific tax, what does it mean? Okay, to avoid that kind of confusion. Next is with respect to the 15th Finance Commission. Here, most of the students have got the right answer to this question on 15th Finance Commission. So this topic of 15th Finance Commission, as you can see, I had discussed in the economic survey video. So here I had discussed, according to 15th Finance Commission, the vertical distribution of taxes to the states, this has been maintained at 41%. But there is a change in the horizontal distribution of taxes, changes in the criteria. For example, the 15th Finance Commission has done away with the population of 1971 census. It has given more weightage to 2011 census. It has given the highest weightage to the income distance criteria. It has introduced the parameter of demographic performance. And as far as the tax efforts is concerned, this criteria of tax efforts was used by the 13th Finance Commission. But when the 14th Finance Commission submitted its recommendations, this tax efforts was not included. The 15th Finance Commission has reintroduced this criteria of tax efforts. So if you go back to the question, it has assigned the highest weightage to the demographic performance. No, highest weightage has been given to the income distance criteria. It has reintroduced the tax effort criteria. Correct. It is following the census of 2011 population data. Correct. So right answer 2 and 3 only. Okay. Next question about India's external trade. This question we had included in our pre-prediction test because, as you can see in last year prelims, there was a question with respect to trends in India's external trade. That is why we had included this particular question. But once again here, the accuracy rate of the students was on the lower side because I do feel that most of students had a confusion with respect to the first statement which was given here. The first statement says that India's trade openness as measured, India's trade openness as measured by trade to GDP ratio is higher than China. See, when we say trade openness, what we do is we take into account the total value of exports from India, that is both goods and services, plus the total value of imports into India. So it's not imports minus exports, it is exports plus imports. Whatever is this value, I convert this into percentage of GDP. So when we say trade to GDP ratio, it is not imports minus exports. It is exports plus imports, the total value of trade in India. And that we convert into percentage of GDP. And this, according to the financial year 2020-21, this is 40%. So here I have attached a screenshot of the provisional estimates of the national income for the year 2020-21. As you can see, the total value of exports in terms of percentage of GDP it is approximately 20%. The total value of imports in terms of percentage of GDP is 20%. So the total trade to GDP ratio is 40%. And what is surprising is India's trade to GDP ratio is actually higher than China. This is a graph which I have taken it directly from the economic survey. See, when we keep on hearing that China is one of the largest exporters of goods and services, we are specifically talking only with the exports. We are not taking into account the imports. But if you take into account both imports and exports, India's trade to GDP ratio is much higher. So the first statement which is given here is actually correct. This is where most of the students must have found it wrong. Second one, India has registered current account surplus for the first time since 1991 reforms. In my economic survey discussion, I had specifically highlighted that India has shown current account surplus for the first time in the last 17 years. Prior to this, India had shown the current account surplus in the year 2003-04. So it says that India has registered the current account surplus for the first time, which is wrong. Third one, the share of the manufactured exports in the overall merchandise exports has increased in the last decade. Once again, this is a trend which we have taken it from the economic survey, previous year's economic survey. So the overall exports from India, they can be categorized into two types: merchandise exports and non-merchandise exports, manufactured exports and non-manufactured exports. And as you can see, the share of the manufactured exports has consistently increased, whereas the share of the non-manufactured exports has got reduced. So third statement which is given here is right. So the right answer would be 1 and 3 only. Okay, next question. Which among the following are the characteristics of gig economy? Now we have all learned about the gig economy. In the gig economy, the organizations as such do not hire the permanent employees. There is no creation of formal employment. Rather than hiring permanent employees, the organizations hire the people or the workers on a short-term contractual basis. These gig workers as such, they are considered to be part of the informal category because they do not have job security, they do not have work security, they do not have access to social security benefits. So keeping that in mind, we had asked this particular question. If you read the first statement here, it says provision of higher flexibility in the working hours to the permanent workforce. This is not gig economy. Gig economy is hiring workers on a short-term contractual basis. It's not about giving flexibility to the permanent workforce. Second one, reduction in the operating costs of the firms. Yes. 3, slowdown in the formal employment creation. Yes, because the gig workers, they are considered to be part of the informal category. So right answer here should be 2 and 3 only. So once again, the accuracy rate has been just around 30%, which means students have found this question to be on the tougher side. This, I believe, is because of the first statement. The first statement is provision of higher flexibility in the working hours to the permanent workforce, which is actually incorrect. Okay, coming to next question. A consistent increase in the incremental capital output ratio is necessarily, the keyword is necessarily, associated with the which among the following. So let's try to find out the answer. See, we all know that investment rates in an economy and GDP growth rate, there's a correlation, right? So we normally keep saying that as the investment rates increases, the GDP growth rate will also increase. Whereas the investment rate, if it reduces, the GDP growth rate would also reduce. Here, we are just looking at how much of investment or how much of capital we are investing in the economy. But the problem here is we are not looking at the efficiency with which the capital is utilized. It may so happen that I would have invested a lot of money, but if this money is not utilized properly, my GDP growth rate would actually come down because it all depends upon the efficiency with which this capital is utilized. So to understand as to whether the capital which you are investing whether it is efficiently utilized or not, what we have is a concept of ICOR, incremental capital output ratio. Let me explain this in very, very simple words. Now, for example, let's say my investment rate in the Indian economy is 30%. I'm just giving an example. 30% is the investment rate. Now, because of this investment rate, I'm able to have a GDP growth rate of, say, 6%. And if I want to calculate ICOR, incremental capital output ratio, it will be calculated as investment rate divided by the GDP growth rate, which means here it will be 30 divided by 6. So my ICOR here would be 5. So this is how I calculate the ICOR. So this shows that every 1 unit of capital, every 1 unit of my investment, this is leading to an increase in the output by 6%. So this is the ICOR. Now let's say my investment next year is same at 30%. But my GDP growth rate has come down to 5%. Now calculate the ICOR. 30 divided by 5. My ICOR value now will be 6. What does this show? This shows that even though my investment rate is same, my GDP growth rate has come down. Why? Because of lower efficiency of capital. My capital is not efficiently utilized. Let's say next year, my investment rate is maintained at 30%. But in this case, my GDP growth rate has come down to 3%. My ICOR value here would be 10. 30 divided by 3. So as my ICOR value reduces, if it increases, as the ICOR increases, it means that the capital is not efficiently utilized, inefficient utilization of capital. On the other hand, as the ICOR value reduces, it means that the capital as such is more efficiently utilized. So there is an inverse proportionality between ICOR and the way the capital is utilized. So if you had applied this simple logic, you would have got the right answer. It says that my ICOR value is consistently increasing. And what does it necessarily mean? One, increase in investment. Does it necessarily mean that my investment rate is increasing? I gave a very specific example where my investment rate has remained same, but my ICOR value has consistently increased. So it is not necessary that my investment rates as such have increased. 2, increase in GDP growth rate. Once again here, my ICOR value has started increasing, but my GDP growth rate has started coming down 6%, 5%, 3%. Decrease in the efficiency of capital utilization. As I said, as my ICOR value increases, the efficiency of capital utilization is reducing. So the right answer to this particular question is C, 3 only. So as I said, we had asked almost like 25 questions from the Indian economy. Out of these 25 questions, I have tried to discuss 12 to 15 questions which the students have found it to be on the difficult side. And overall, if you had to get the right answers to these questions, as I said at the start of my discussion, 3 things are important. 1, conceptual understanding. 2, knowing the current affairs. 3, interlinking the current affairs to the core concepts. If you're able to do that, you would have got the right answers to most of the questions. I hope we are clear on this. Okay, fine then. We will, in case if you have any queries, you can ask your queries to us.